Okay, so we are a little bit ahead of time here, and what I thought, because why not? Let's just talk about it every day.
Yeah, it's a fun conversation.
Let's revisit CARES a little bit, because during yesterday and even into today, we're getting emails that there's some confusion out there, and so first thing I want to tell you is there was a memorandum that was sent out this morning. Okay, it's called Questions About CARES Act Reimbursed Through IFA. So that just went out this morning. We sent it out through the eGov delivery, but I have yet to send it out to the associations. So if you don't have it in a couple days, let us know.
It will be on the website.
It will be on the website, but we'll make sure you get a hold of it. So I think part of the confusion is like kind of the timeline of things that are happening. And so, we put out some stuff in the very, very beginning because everything was just like emergency and we wanted to get it all out there and get you guys all that information. And as time has moved on, we've clarified that, okay? So when we're talking about the stuff that's distributed through IFA, that directive that was sent out last Friday is what you're going to want to follow, okay? All of that. So if you have questions, go to that directive first and we'll start. Secondly, the presentation that I put out yesterday, honestly, we knew the directive was coming, but the timing of it and getting it on the website, it just didn't happen. So I wasn't able to go in there and change my slides. So what I'm going to do is after the conference here, I am going to update my slides so that those notes that I was telling you about that were in replace of the change that happened on Friday, I will put those so that it's only that current information on there. Again, we don't know what's going to happen in a couple months from now. Okay, so please look at the guidance. That is where we are. That's what's going to be the advice we're going to give you. Could it change? Yeah, it's just ever changing right now. We're trying to keep it as simple as we can, but in the reality, that's what it is. There is something that just came through. Okay, so then, where's this other thing? All right, so one thing, and appropriations are the biggest question that there is, okay? And so, we've got an email here talking about appropriations. When we first brought out about appropriations, we were really talking about, when we said, you didn't really need an appropriation, we were really talking about the provider relief funds, okay? Those are the advanced grants that were given to you. And we've always said, if you have an advanced grant, you don't really need an appropriation. Okay, move forward. So we were just kind of clarifying that. Reimbursement grants have always required an appropriation to spend county money. All right. If you want proof, we can go through the bulletins and Lori's presentation last year. She did a whole presentation on appropriations, and it's in there as well. Okay, that is where we are now. So if you have a reimbursement grant, whether it's through IFA or anything else, it needs to be through an appropriation, okay? If it's an advanced grant, it doesn't. I think what else I've got here, without going too much here. Okay. The other question that we had was, has to do with fund numbers. So I've had one county who's reached out and said, we were using those fund numbers you guys assigned for other grants. Is it okay if we use these? Yes, just use what you're using at that point. I've had another one come out and say, hey, we didn't get the provider relief fund, okay, the advanced grant that came in the beginning, we didn't get that. So when we got our IFA set up, we just set it up in 8900. Is that okay, or do I have to move it? You can use it there as long as you understand it's not the provider relief, it is your IFA one, okay? We're not going to make you move those around as long as you're keeping track of it in a separate fund. Does that make sense? We just don't want you mixing the two. So sometimes when we get an email coming in, someone will say, well, hey, I put my IFA in the 8900 for the, the provider relief. Well, those are two separate grants. That's why you'll hear us say provider relief is this and IFA is that. I know this is so confusing. There's so much money being thrown out there. These grants are coming. Some are advanced, some are reimbursement. the guidance is ever changing. The allowances are, ever changing. I mean, up until September, payroll costs weren't even allowed to be pulled from the IFA, and so they opened that up. So we're all trying to work together for the best transparency and accountability moving forward. So I did want to give a few because we've got this extra time. You guys have had a night to think about it. I'm sure it was discussed at different times, yesterday. If you have any questions, we've got a few, send them through. Let's, we can kind of chit chat about that a little bit since we do have that time. So I'm just going to kind of give you guys a few minutes to see if you guys can put that together. See if we have any. Right?
Yep.
I'm curious how many people are there. I can't see that side of the room either.
Mm-mm.
Oh, thanks, Zach. That's a pretty good sized room. Everybody's social distancing. It's awesome.
Oh, wow.
You can all wave to us if you want. We'll wave to you. I will also send out, once we get that, once I get my PowerPoint updated, I will send out an email to everybody to let them know I've updated it with the current information from the directive, okay? I know that was a little confusing and I apologize for that. Does anybody have any questions? How about anybody virtual? I can answer, Amy. You asked if we could add you to the eGov. Lori's going to talk about this later, so I don't want to take part of her presentation. But what I am going to tell you is it's something you're going to have to do yourself. Okay? I've added everybody I can, and she'll kind of explain that here in a little bit. Ooh, we might have a question. We have a question coming. I like that.
Is yours okay?
I can hear you.
Let's hear from the live audience just a second.
Okay.
We would like an explanation of the difference between a reimbursable grant and a advanced grant.
Okay,
Can
you
you
want
give
to know what the difference between
An
the two are?
example. Can you give us an example?
Okay, so let's start with the provider relief fund, the coronavirus provider relief that was automatically deposited into that Optimum bank account. That money was just given to you. You hadn't spent any of it. It was just, here's a pot of money. They gave it to you before you spent the money. So it was an advanced grant where the IFA really operates as like a reimbursement grant. You're spending the money and then you're going to them and saying, hey, we spent these costs. Can you now reimburse us? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Questions from the audience that we can come up with?
I like the interaction. We will say we miss all of your faces. It is very different presenting to you in this way.
We have another one.
I like it.
What is it, the IFA? The IFA. You guys were saying with payroll that we can reimburse county general, but how do we can we reimburse ambulance that's not out of county general or our health department? How do we put those monies back in?
Okay, so I think I heard you. It was kind of quiet. So you're saying if we had payroll out of the ambulance fund, we have submitted that for reimbursement. How do we reimburse that fund? Correct? Just thumbs up, maybe. Okay, so in that case, you've only got the two options with the payroll. You would want to not do the alternative process if you're trying to reimburse the ambulance fund. So what you would do in that case is you ask IFA for reimbursement for those salaries out of the ambulance, all right? They would be, you'd move those expenses over to that IFA CARES fund, all right? And when that reimbursement comes, you put it into the CARES fund, it zeroes out the CARES fund. When you moved those disbursements, it reinstated your fund balance and it reinstated that appropriation there. Does that make sense?
Yes. We have another question. Hang on. My legs are
It's
short.
fine, we got the time. Sorry to make you run.
So on the IFA grant, we have like 11 requests right now. So the first 5, we did adjustments. Now, some of the other ones, we have like a mobile unit, $400 and some thousand they haven't bought. So you're saying that can be paid unappropriated?
No. That needs to be paid through an appropriation, but I'm gonna suggest that if you haven't submitted it or you haven't purchased it yet, you talk to IFA before you do. Because we know of other counties who have actually done this and they're not reimbursing them.
So they sent these requests to IFA, and obviously, I mean, by giving us the money, isn't that the approval?
Did they already give you the money?
Yes.
Okay, so when you paid for it, did you pay for it out of unappropriated?
We haven't paid for it. They haven't bought it.
Okay, so you were like in a contract to purchase.
Right.
Okay, ahead of time. And so when you got that money, you should have put it into your CARES fund, and now you can pay for that out of the CARES fund with that reimbursement for IFA. This is the only one this works for, by the way.
Without an appropriation.
For that case, because you got the money before you actually paid for it. It's part of Framework 2, I think, maybe 3.
I mean, in that IFA fund, right now, there's nothing appropriated, and I've done all these adjustments, so you have all these, payments and different accounts, but nothing is appropriated. So if we do get money in advance, like I know there's even more that the sheriff's done, like purchase orders. We haven't received those checks yet, but when we do, they haven't purchased it yet, so we're just supposed to go ahead and purchase it without an appropriation.
So part of the directive, they allowed for this, okay? It's Framework 2, all right? So if you've got a reimbursement that's based on unpaid invoices and purchase orders, all right? You will, once you receive that reimbursement, I know it's kind of confusing because it's not really a reimbursement at this point, but we're gonna use it, we're gonna treat it as one, okay? It needs to be put into that CARES fund, all right? And then the expenditures to the vendor can be made from the CARES grant fund. Now, they have to match the application that you made to IFA. So if you have an actual invoice or whatever that you've used to get a reimbursement, whatever you spend out needs to match. If it doesn't, the difference between that money expended and what you actually asked for reimbursement from IFA, you may have to return that money to them if you pay less than what you asked them for.
Ricky, I think what she's asking for is can it be out of a 50 unappropriated line? And this is a grant, so it works just like your grants would normally. Would you agree?
Yes and no. Again, this is a little bit different because this is something that you haven't spent your money on. So yes, once you get that money, you're going to kind of act like it's in advance in this case. If you have already spent the money, then no, it needs to be appropriated out of an appropriated fund. In this case, she hasn't paid for it. So she's asked for reimbursement, you're gonna put it in the CARES, you're gonna pay for it. Is it gonna have an appropriation there? No, but it needs to match what your reimbursement was.
So she could actually pay it out of the 8,900 fund if it wasn't paid for?
Yes,
Okay.
According to Framework 2 of the directive, yes.
Okay, and then that could be out of an unappropriated line.
For that instance, yes. But again, that CARES fund will need to be zero by the time you're done. There's no money left over in there. If there is, it is going to be paid back to IFA.
We're going to make sure every penny's spent. She has another question. This one.
Okay.
Have you provided us with the information on where to send the money back once we have a total? to IFA.
Part of what she said.
Have you provided procedures to send the money back? if it's-
No, we have not yet. I don't know if we were talking about doing that or not. To be honest, this is all came out Friday and we were on conference mode. So we're kind of out of the loop a little bit on some of that stuff, but I can look into it and see where we are.
Thank you. I know IFA has, because we have had some reimbursable expenses that needed to be returned, and they are very good about providing that information if you contact them through their
There you
links.
go. Is there any other questions?
I don't see any hands, or they're embarrassed to raise them because they're.
Oh, wait. We got some coming through here. Okay. So, okay, they set up a separate grant fund. However, the expenditures we've been using are numerous and vary. Yes. For example, office supplies, operating supplies, miscellaneous equipment. Then we also use different location numbers so we would know what department it was for. Okay. I'm not sure how to appropriate the grant fund as far as how much money in each line items. Probably shouldn't have read this one out loud just because I think I need more information. I think I need more information. Okay. There is a question inside there for the clerks. We can answer that later. For the clerk's election, sorry.
Oh,
All right, that was from Amy. Amy, I'm sure you're listening, but if you send me a little bit more information, I'm not quite sure what your question is. I'm sorry. Okay. All right, you guys, is there any other questions in the live audience? You got plenty of time to ask them now.
I don't see any hands going up, so thank you. We'll probably have more this afternoon. Certainly, right?
Possibly. We have half an
They all look
hour.
hungry.
We ended a little bit
They all
early.
look hungry. I don't know.
Something else. Hold on a minute. All right, here's another one. We submitted payroll reimbursement for our sheriff's department to the IFA to receive for full amount available for our county. Okay, we received the funds and put them into our CARES fund. The IFA has told us that we can continue to reimburse county departments that submit invoices that fall under the approved categories through IFA guidelines without the IFA approval. I'm not sure what that means. Our finance department is reimbursing these expenditures through journal entries. Can that still be done even though the request was submitted? Okay, what I think she's saying is they've submitted all their payroll, they've gotten it back, and now they're still doing like department reimbursements from the payroll amount. And no, I mean, you did it for payroll. It's done. So if you have submitted it for payroll and you've put it into the CARES fund like you're supposed to, you have one of two options. You either move those payroll disbursements over to the CARES and zero out that grant fund, or you do the alternative process with an ordinance from the commissioner saying, we're going to do this alternative process. You create a claim and you write it from CARES fund to general fund only. I'm going to say that one more time. To general fund only. Because we did receive emails yesterday saying, well, can't we just do it to the rainy day? No. It has to go to general fund. All right? If you want to do rainy day procedures after it's in general fund, that's fine. But the claim itself goes from CARES to general fund. Does that answer your question?
I think part of that too, once it's in general fund, You can spend it for any purpose that general fund can be used for. You don't need IFA approval. It doesn't even have to be a COVID expense.
Right.
It's available. So if you have departments, if they're in the general fund, you're not reimbursing them. But if there are other funds that are spending it, you can move those claims to the general fund and pay them if you have an appropriation to do so. Because you don't need IFA approval, you don't need anyone. It's general fund money and can be spent on any legal purpose of the county, including COVID expenses.
Oh, do you have an example of an ordinance we can use? We actually do. So if you send us an email to the county's box, we can send it to you. It's just a draft, obviously, please send. So yes, we do. I also think AIC has a copy as well, but just let us know if you can, like I said, if you can do the county's email box, that way I don't have to keep a list. All right. Once it's in the general fund, does it require an additional appropriation to spend, or can it be spent through a joint commissioner council ordinance? It needs an appropriation to spend. Make sure.
About the council, the commissioners asked the council for appropriation, additional appropriation for $1 million. They're going to do their thing on their ordinance next Wednesday. And I ask you, the weird thing, you may have already answered it, but they want to move this to their CCD fund. And that's a no-no, right? You can't, once they...
There's no authority to move from general fund to CCD.
Just spend it out of general fund, whatever, because it can be...
Yes, because you can spend it for any legal purpose out of the general fund, so just spend it out of the general fund.
I thought that was a little strange, so I'll make sure they don't do it.
We have another question.
It's fine.
Okay, and follow up to that last question. There's no authority to spend this out of, say, the CCD fund, but could you address how it would be possible to move this money from the general fund into the rainy day fund for safekeeping for, next year?
So I give the statute.
Yeah, the statute specifically gives authority to transfer from general fund to rainy day, and it provides the process to do that. And that's in 3618 5.1, I think.
I don't know these off the top of my head. 3618 5.1. Look at you, gold star.
So that's what we're saying. The statute says you can transfer money from general fund, from a lit fund to rainy day, but there's no statute that says you can transfer general fund to CCD. So you have to have statutory authority to be able to transfer money. We're going to talk about that this afternoon a little bit more. So I have some other examples then that might help too.
Okay, we have another comment.
That's fine.
This is Jackie with the Association of Indiana Counties. Last Friday, I believe it was, the Association of Counties, Ryan Hoff, sent out a constant contact email to all county auditors and county commissioners. It had a step-by-step procedure for claiming on this special procedure and a sample ordinance that he worked with Lori and Ricky to get approved. So that has went out. You might check your email. It went out late. If you don't have it in your regular email, please check your spam, because sometimes constant contact goes into spam. If you also need it, you can always contact the AIC too. They can shoot that back out with the step-by-steps.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jackie. Okay, check it again. We have like 4 sources of questions, so I apologize for having to look. All right. The ordinance emails are coming in.
Oh, yeah.
I want one. Okay. We still got a little bit of time to kill. Any other questions? Specific anything.
Was that a resolution or an ordinance, Jackie?
It's an ordinance. Can you answer that?
Yes.
The document that went out was a resolution/ordinance. Some counties use resolutions, some use ordinance, and I believe the State Board of Accounts will tell you that either one will work.
Is that true, State Board of Accounts?
Sorry. What? I'm sorry. I'm
They use
sorry. I'm reading.
resolutions as well as ordinance. We're assuming ordinance, but we're not gonna take out an
not
exception if
gonna
it says
take it, yeah.
resolution, long as the right people have signed it.
I'm sorry. I have 4 sources of information coming to me. I apologize.
The Indiana code on rainy day is 36-1-8-5.1.
Okay. Okay, hold on. We got more. Oh, wait. Okay. Sorry, we got a little bit clarification on the one a little bit earlier. So basically what she's wanting to know is how do you do the appropriations for a grant when you're unsure of what line items will be used? So this is where we're saying, like, for the IFA one, okay, for sure, you know, you're gonna spend that money out of one of your already appropriated funds, and then you would move it over. So you wouldn't actually appropriate that grant fund for that. Does that answer your question, Amy? You cut out again. You put it in there. Another ordinance. Okay. I hate to let them out too early. Wish we could play a fun game.
Yeah.
Oh, something else. Sorry, Patty wrote just a thank you to everybody for all the information. So, okay. And again, we understand this is all new. It's all ever changing. We don't know what's going to happen in the next couple months. We're all trying to do the best we can, you know, to help provide you guys guidance, you know, for that transparency, for that accountability of those funds. But we also have to remember how government works, how the counties work, you know, how your council's the one that does the appropriations, those kinds of things. And we all need to work together and we all need to communicate. All right, that's the only way this is really going to work and really have detailed records.
And as Tara pointed out this morning, next year we're going to be auditing this.
Yes.
As much as we can get straightened out this year, it's going to save you time next year. Because if auditing for the CARES Act is anything like it was for the ARA money, it's going to be a bumpy ride.
Yes. Patty said we could share her little thing here, and she said, bear with us as we try to drink from the fire hydrant. I think we all feel a little wet.
That is so
beyond
true.
little. We're all drowning.
I don't understand that question, so I won't go there. Okay. Susan, I'm assuming you're listening. I think what you're referring to here, and let me know if you're wrong, is when we were talking about her, about the one county that had purchased or had not purchased it yet. They had a strong commitment to purchase and that they were reimbursed money. Her question was she thought that they could only spend money outside of the CARES grant fund prior. And I think she's talking about not spending money when it's in there. And the only exception is if you had an invoice where you hadn't actually spent the money yet, you got reimbursement from IFA, you would put it into that CARES fund and you would spend out of there the exact amount of money for the exact thing that you asked for
I think
reimbursement
she's
for.
also talking about the change Friday to where now you have to spend it out of another fund, because we were saying spend it out of the CARES fund, and now.
We did originally say spend out of the CARES fund, but now it's not that way. Now you have to spend it from an appropriated fund.
But again, for clarification on that regard, we just went over the 8,900 expense. If you had already hadn't expended it, that is still an okay process to continue with, correct?
So, and this kind of is into framework 3. We have to kind of address if you have already spent out of that grant fund, because that was our prior guidance, okay? Then, you have created a negative balance. Basically, you just need to make that whole again. We're not telling you to go back and to get the appropriation for those at this point if you've got the grant money to make it whole.
Okay, this is Susan. I'm actually not virtual, but I was just talking to you email. So I'm getting
Hi, Susan.
I'm getting like 50 different messages here. So the one, I understand the one that had the PO, I understand that part, but I believe that it was just stated that we were to spend out of a different fund. And I was under the impression that before, when this was all happening in the beginning, yes, we had many expenditures, but then when all the memos came out, we were to spend out of our grant fund because that's where our money would be going into. So our grant would be negative, we would pay for whatever we were getting reimbursement for, and then our reimbursement would go into the grant fund, and then at the end of the day, we'd be zero. However, the original beginning expenditures, we had to claim adjust into the grant fund so that county general or whatever, those appropriations went back. But now I thought you just said that we have to spend out of a total different fund. I mean, I know we did payroll, so we are appropriating our general fund in payroll, but I thought you just said we could not spend out of the grant fund.
Okay. So in the beginning, some of you guys had spent money prior to getting the grant. Those things that you had spent, let's say your supplies out of general fund, you were to put you could request reimbursement for it. Then you would move those expenses to the CARES fund. You would get reimbursement for it. It would zero it out. All right. From that point on, once you got the grant, our original guidance was to spend out of the grant. All right, itself. Then you would get a CARES reimbursement. It would again zero out that grant. If you are still claiming money as of Friday, this changed. This is one of the changes that happened on Friday. So now, if you are still have money to claim, you now have to spend it out of an appropriated fund, just like you did with the ones prior to receiving the grant.
Okay,
You would
so
then move those over.
prior to Friday, our expenditures that we spent out and received our reimbursements back in our grant fund, that grant fund does or does not have to have an appropriation.
I'm not trying to understand what you would need an appropriation for at that point.
Well, because before you just said that any reimbursable grant has to have an appropriation and an advance grant.
You mean go back and get an appropriation for the expenses you already did?
Yes.
Okay.
Do I have to do
that? No, you've got your reimbursement. It will zero it out. But from
It's
here
already-
on forward, from Friday on forward, you will need it.
Okay. And then my other question is, I thought we could not apply for reimbursement until we had truly already paid for whatever we were asking for.
We thought that too, but evidently that is not the case.
So
That's not what
IFA
the
did
IFA
send
for-
something out
okay,
that
that we
said if
make
you
a
had a
request.
strong commitment to purchase, that they would reimburse it. That is why we had that framework too, where we talk about if you get the reimbursement before you spend the money.
Huh. I
Again,
thought that was a
Ever
question on there.
changing wheel, so.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I think it probably was a question on the form, but I think they were asking that as a, have you already done it, or if not? I mean, I think that was a question on the form originally. Yeah, we have another question.
When we were notified about the grant, we went ahead and had a meeting and discussed what we were going to spend the money on and had appropriations set up in our CARES Act grant fund. And since that time, we've been spending money on office supplies, PPE, personnel, blah, 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 writing that fund into the negative, which I understand that's fine to have done up until the 23rd of October, correct? No more of
Yes.
that can go on after the 23rd of October. All right, so I'm tracking you there. Yesterday, I received word that one of our commissioners has decided that they want to use part of it now for small business loans, which, I mean, it seems rather sudden since there's only 2 months left in the year that we're going to try to pull that off. But am I correct in understanding that we have to have all this money spent by December 30th?
You have to have all the money, claimed, and that you had spent it.
So, I
by
mean,
or December 30th.
instructions, yeah, the original instructions said we had to spend it before we could claim it, but now that's not the case? Or is it?
Okay, so it was set up as a reimbursement. We, as State Board of Accounts, all were under the impression that it had to be spent. Again, IFA made only one little statement that said it had to be a firm commitment to purchase. So it couldn't be like, I think we're gonna buy this. It had to be, you had a PO in your hand that you've already made this commitment. As soon as you get that money, it's going right out the door to pay for it. That is what the exception that they made. Does that make sense?
I guess I would just add on to that, the appropriation, and a question, I guess. The appropriation that you set up in 8,900 when you did that, you just did it for the maximum amount that your county was allowed. See, that's perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
If they don't spend that, I'm assuming you will. But if they don't, those would be the fundings, the balance in that fund would be returned to IFA. Is that correct, Ricky? Or
Well, I mean, they can't, they can only claim it if they are spending it. So there's not gonna be a balance left in there unless,
The unused allocation would revert back to
Yeah.
IFA. And whether that has to go back to the federal government or not, I don't know. So if you were allocated 2 million and you only spent 1.5, and you left 500,000 on the table, that's IFA's money and they may have to return it to the
Right.
federal government. We don't know that.
that was the question. If I have $5 left in my grant fund, I'm sending it back to them because I don't want to get dinged by State Board of Accounts.
that's what I was.
You
There
wouldn't
shouldn't
have
be. You
it
wouldn't have a balance, that's what I was trying to say. You wouldn't have a balance
at
in
the
there.
county.
At the county. It would still be an IFA. So if the county has it, they should have used it. I mean, it's not, you don't get it ahead of time to spend. The only exception is if you have a firm commitment to buy, but you're really just a pass-through. I get it, it's right out the door. It's not staying in that fund.
In a perfect world, correct.
And we're not understanding how you have the $5 left in your fund. Because we're seeing it zeroed out each time.
Well, we have a lot of individuals in our counties, at least in mine, I should speak for myself, that they're submitting expenses and then all of a sudden, and they are approved by IFA, and money has been sent to us. And then, lo and behold, something happened on the way to the purchase claims desk, I guess. And they decided maybe they didn't need that extra little flyer that they thought they needed to begin with when they submitted for the expense, and so they adjusted it.
So you're, as a county, you were submitting committed to purchase that really weren't commitments to purchase.
But when our EMA director is submitting, it is, in his eyes, and everybody else's eyes at that moment, a commitment to purchase, correct?
But it really isn't, because he can change his mind later and say, we're not doing it. So you haven't entered into a contract, you haven't issued a purchase order, you haven't said, hey, vendor, we're going to buy this.
Well, as an auditor, we only get the droppings at the end, so.
If you're claiming money and then not using it on what, you would have to return that money to IFA, because that was not what they sent it to you for.
Yes, and that,
Right.
that would be my answer, or my question
Yes,
there.
yes. We're with you again.
Gotcha. I do have one on here, which is talking about, says they put their money into the CARES fund. They have the ordinance on what this reimbursed money will be spent on. I was under the impression that we could pay for these items out of the grant fund unappropriated. Is this correct? We were told whatever money is left then can go to county general. No, it's not correct. Once you're getting a reimbursement, that reimbursement is to zero out the fund. The only time that there would be money, that you would have money to transfer out, is if you chose to do the alternative process with your payroll costs for public safety and public health. That's the only thing, and that is still a transfer to general. Everything else should have had you should either move the expenses over to zero that out, but there shouldn't be a balance left in that fund. Is there anything else? Let's check one more time. Did my phone go off too? Okay. No?
Probably not, because you're doing the microphone.
Well, okay. Is there any other questions from the live audience?
I don't see any hands waving.
All right. Well, that's pretty good. We got you guys up to about 8 minutes on right before lunch, and I guess we'll let you guys go for lunch, and we'll be back here at 1 o'clock. Promptly, we do have DLGF, Scott Maitland, coming to speak to you guys. So I hope you enjoy your lunch, virtually or in person. Okay, I said that again, but I meant
Eat real food.
whether you're joining us virtually or in person. And we'll see you guys back this afternoon.